Welcome to the Libertarian Institute Odyssey and YouTube channel. My name is Keith Knight. Today I'm joined by Tommy Salmons and Patrick McFarland. We are going to do a little weekly roundup here, give a general idea of what we're working on at the Libertarian Institute. Tommy, how's it going, brother?
Good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Walk us through this item you have right here, U.S. Color Revolutions with Daniel McAdams.
Yeah, so I watched Oliver Stone's documentary about Ukraine in 2014. What was it, the Maidan? And I started like thinking, I was like, man, this looks really familiar. Like, I think I saw this in like Chicago and all these cities around the United States. So I got Daniel McAdams on and had him walk me through color revolutions, what causes a color revolution, what they look like, the different components of a color revolution. And I was asking him, I was like, were the BLM riots possibly a color revolution in the United States? Is this something that we'll find out in 20 or 30 years, that this was, you know, conspired and thought up by the intelligence agencies and funded by the intelligence agencies, especially when you look at something like George Soros putting so much money into attorney generals around the country, and it happened to be all the cities that these riots were taking place. I was like, it looks kind of funny. And, you know, we came to the conclusion it's possible that it is quite possible. And at this point, it's all speculation, but it's an interesting thing to think about. It's when you start looking at the way that the color revolutions are take place and the method behind them, and the way that they go about organizing them, it was very similar to what we saw in Portland and these big cities around the United States in 2020.
Very well done. Yeah, Daniel McAdams worked on Ron Paul's campaign, worked with the Ron Paul Institute. Vitally important stuff that they have going on there. Patrick McFarland, the Justin Raimondo Fellow. First story for you. Elon Musk reaches deal to buy Twitter for $44 billion. Patrick McFarland, what do we have here? What are some of the important takeaways?
Well, I thought it was really interesting because I think what we have is some kind of Randian Atlas Shrugged situation where some philanthropist, like a well-intentioned billionaire, comes in to save us from the big tech overlords. And I'm seeing a lot of different takes on it, and I'm kind of interested to see what you guys think. Is this the libertarian solution to free speech on the internet? I will withhold my judgment, however, I am skeptical. But for the last, I don't know, 5 years, it seems like libertarians have really been scratching their heads about this question because, you know, it's a private company, bro. And it seems like when big tech is fostered by government, and when big tech is in bed with government, and basically is the government is the hand in glove, where big tech being the glove, basically strangling free speech. Can that really be called a private company? And it just seems like libertarians have not had a great answer for big tech censorship. And like I said, I'm skeptical, but I'll withhold my judgment to see what real changes do come to Twitter, because Elon Musk, who has expressed some more friendliness to free speech issues in the past, however, in some ways he is he is in bed with the government, cooperating with the military-industrial complex, pushing things like climate change and things like that. So we'll see. I have to say I am a little bit excited that he has purchased Twitter, because I don't know how it could get much worse than it has, although he said he has a plan to, quote, authenticate all humans, and I'm really concerned as to what exactly that means. So it'll be interesting to see how this story develops in the next couple of years.
I know. I was thinking about that that exact thing earlier. Pat, do me a favor. Just make sure your audio is coming in from your microphone, please. I was thinking, yeah, it would be nice to know that I'm really not getting catfished whenever I'm talking to someone. But at the same time, it's like, okay, so imagine you're filming, let's say, the Shanghai lockdowns in China, or you're getting footage from North Korea. You want that person to be authenticated. You want their information to be available. Like, would it be everyone has to have their name so they can't be anonymous? Or is it just verifying them on the back end and then they could have a stage name, so to speak? Because there's a lot of places where you're afraid to speak out. Heck, we're terrified of being called racist or bigoted, or, you know, my grandparents terrified of being called communist if they didn't support the mass murder campaign in Laos. So I'm not sure if authenticating everyone is necessarily a good thing. Tommy, any big takeaways from the Elon Musk deal?
Well, I probably have a little bit of a different perspective here because my wife is South African. So I kind of understand his gung-ho-ness when it comes to free speech and things like that. The one thing that people don't understand about even countries that are considered Western, when they come to America and they see the way that we look at government, the way that we look at freedom, it's a big shock to them. They don't understand it. And once they embrace it, it's full throttle. They're going for it. As far as Elon Musk goes, I mean, I have a friend of mine that says Elon Musk buying Twitter is the equivalent of Prometheus delivering fire to humanity to save humanity, and the other titans are going to be mad at him, and you kind of see that kind of playing out in front of us. Now, I don't know if what Elon Musk is going to do is going to be that big of a benefit. I have no idea. And I'm like Patrick, I'm quite skeptical of it. But what I do see and what I think that we're witnessing is a very similar kind of reaction to the Musk as we saw with Trump's election. And and I think that has to do with the hopelessness and helplessness that people feel in modern politics today. And a lot of that has to do with the speed at which the technology is advancing beyond our evolutionary capabilities to keep up with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult because, you know, you want to celebrate, hey, there's been this big victory. We know it's a victory because the worst people on the planet are very upset with this. But we don't know that it's necessarily going in the proper direction, which is why we just have to embrace the competition model. Elon Musk shared a screenshot today that Truth Social is out downloaded Twitter. Granted, if Twitter's been around forever, it's not a good metric because everyone's already downloaded it and Truth Social is new. But the point is that you still just have to have alternatives. So follow us on Odyssey. Make sure you're following us there.
Patrick, part of the problem with that, I think that Elon Musk is getting at, is Twitter is considered one of the smaller social medias. It has less users than something like Facebook. So his I think his concern is, and we also have to realize that the first quarter earnings are coming out on Thursday, right? And so, and when he's talking about authenticating people, from what I've understood, I've listened to Tim Pool talk about this a little bit because he's very much more social media savvy than I am. So I've kind of listened to what he's had to say about it. And what he's saying that Elon Musk is proposing is that everybody can get a blue check if they pay like a $5 a month fee. So you subscribe to Twitter for $5 a month. Therefore, you're increasing Twitter's profits, and you can get a blue check mark. And this is how you're authenticating the humanity. So that might not be so nefarious as in the long run. That might just be a way that Twitter's looking at increasing the amount of revenue that's coming in. But yeah, Thursday, their first quarter earnings are coming in. And so a lot of people are saying that the way that Elon Musk timed this is, and what he's doing by showing that Truth Social is far advanced as far as downloads, is what he's doing is he's showing like the reason, like I'm buying this, and he's talking to the shareholders right now. The shareholders still have to vote on whether or not this deal goes through. So he's signaling to the shareholders like it's not going to be good for y'all if y'all reject this offer, because not only does it look like the revenue is going to be down for Twitter, it also looks like the way that the contract was set up between the board members and Elon Musk. If the board backs out of the sell, they have to pay Elon Musk $1 billion.
Patrick, did you hear the hacked or the leaked Twitter all hands on deck phone call from Project Veritas?
No, I didn't get a chance to listen to it. I just know of its existence.
It's absolutely worth checking out. It's
Really?
the most recent upload on Project Veritas's channel. All right, few more items to get through. I saw this article, so I wanted us to run it on the Institute. I got the title, "For 12 years and tens of thousands of dollars, is schooling worth it?" This is by George Leaf, and he is summarizing the work of Brian Kaplan in his book, The Case Against Education. It's funny that Princeton published this because Brian Kaplan's example, this is what he uses in his new book, Labor Econ versus the World. Brian Kaplan says, really, is schooling about building skills that we learn and then go in the world to use? He says, suppose you could have a Princeton education without the diploma, or a Princeton diploma without the education. Which would you choose? If you have to ponder, you already believe in the power of signaling. By contrast, if you were stranded on an island and had to choose between knowledge of boat building and a boat building degree, you wouldn't ponder. When you face the labor market, it's important to be impressive. When you face the ocean, all that matters is skill. So what Kaplan is saying here is that far from it being a series of skills that we later learn in life, it's actually just a signal to future employers, look, we're dedicated to doing stuff. We can focus and we can stick with something. That's all it's saying. And then he says, now, this is a very, very expensive way to say something so cheap. I mean, for all what you learn on the first week on the job is a heck of a lot more, job skills, many more job skills than you will have learned in the 12 years in state education. So he correctly concludes that it's, so much of a waste of time, and that the state shouldn't be subsidizing it at all, certainly. So yes, Brian Kaplan's concept of signaling was so vitally important, because then it makes sense. It's like, oh, that's why for hours a day we could go without learning anything of value. Patrick, your next topic here, we have NATO is waging a proxy war in Ukraine. Fill us in on this issue.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, all we really are seeing lately in the developments of the Russian war in Ukraine is escalation. And that escalation is coming in the form of weapons and arms flowing into Ukraine from NATO members. And essentially, the United States has this policy. There was a report in the Washington Post, I believe, saying that for some in NATO, peace in Ukraine should not come too soon, or at too big of a cost to the interests of NATO members or of Ukraine. So for some in NATO, it's better for the war in Ukraine to continue going indefinitely. And you have, I believe, Mark Milley talking about how this war, the length of this war, is going to be measured in years. And just recently, we have Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, yesterday saying that the U.S. will keep moving heaven and earth to send weapons into Ukraine. And all of this is just incredibly concerning. We have escalations of military equipment, in the kind of military equipment coming into Ukraine, with Germany pledging to send anti-aircraft tanks to Ukraine, and a bunch of other, like the UK vowing to that Ukrainians should be carrying out attacks inside Russia with British weapons. And this is just very concerning. We have attacks being reported in Moldova that Ukraine is extending the conflict beyond Ukrainian borders. And so we have this piece coming back to it that Kyle wrote on yesterday, Tuesday, the 26th, talking about how Sergei Lavrov, Moscow's top diplomat, saying that the United States is engaging essentially in what amounts to a proxy war with Russia by supplying weapons to Kiev. And it underscores the fact that these weapons are legitimate targets for the Russian military. And so what we have is a huge risk of actual kinetic warfare occurring between Russia and these military convoys that are bringing weapons into Ukraine. And it just seems to me like this should be what everyone is talking about in the United States, that even normies should be very concerned about this. But, instead we have the myriad distractions and things that occupy our time, when the United States and the world being on the brink of World War III doesn't seem to be, it's been going on for more than a month now, so our attention goes elsewhere. But this is still occurring, and it's only getting worse.
I know. It's like, imagine Chris Rock getting slapped 1 billion times. That's how bad this. I don't know by what other metric I can explain how terrible this is. Did you guys see the recent documentary? Ryan Dawson posted it on his channel, called The Donbass War.
No, I haven't seen that.
No, I haven't seen that.
Dude, you know what? I almost am, shy to recommend it just because it's so depressing. But heavens, is it good? It gets into the fact that, look, this has been a conflict going on for some time, but especially since around March to October of 2014. Just a totally different narrative than Russia's trying to rebuild the Soviet Empire. And you can see that basically these people in the eastern region, the Yanukovych separatists, the Russian separatists, were basically designated as a terrorist group. And as bad as the January 6th people are treated in America, these people are shelled and bombed and shot at for years because they were a terrorist group that wasn't recognizing this government as legitimate. That totally changes the narrative from Ukraine versus Russia versus governments are evil and it's the citizenry that has to pay the price. So vital, but it is really depressing. So I still don't know if I even recommend, if I should recommend it. Overall, it's really good.
Well, and it's good. Sorry,
go ahead, Patrick.
It's good to point out that this conflict has been ongoing. I said it's been going on for a couple months now, but of course that's just since Russia really entered the fray in to the level it has. But anyway, sorry, Tommy.
No, I was just going to ask if y'all had seen that. There's this guy. One of my listeners sent me a YouTube channel of this guy. I think his name's Patrick Lancaster, who's on the ground with Russian forces in Mariupol. And he's actually kind of doing like what Tim Pool used to do when he did on-the-ground reporting and following around the Russian military. He's been covering the Donbass region for 8 years. He actually married a Ukrainian woman and was living in Donbass. And he sent his wife and his kids to Russia, and he's following around the Russian and Chechnyan military during the Mariupol fight. So it's quite interesting. I think, like I said, I think his name's Patrick Lancaster. I'll get you a link for that because it's really interesting to look at.
Next story, we have ESG and the big oil conspiracy, James Corbett and Tommy Salmons. Tommy, what's up with this?
Okay, well, anybody who's listened to my podcast knows that I'm completely obsessed with ESG. I think it's one of the worst things that's coming down the pike financially for the average American and just the average citizen around the world. And if you don't know what ESG is, it stands for environmental, social, and corporate governance. What they're doing is they're creating a kind of social credit score based upon where you spend your money, where you invest. Now, what they've done originally is they've started focusing on investors. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to curb where investors spend their money. And in so doing, they created the SEC. I say they, I should be more, pertinent and on point with my language here. The SEC has created a task force to track where investors are spending money. and where they're investing their money. And then they're pressuring banks and financial institutions to not give loans to people who are to investors who are spending money in places that are bad for the environment or bad socially or bad corporate governance. And each of these things have their own breakdown, and it could take years to go through all of that. So just to give an example, let's say Merrill Lynch has a 401k holder who's invested in BlackRock. Then their ESG score would be higher than a 401k holder that is invested in Exxon, right? And so what has happened, they've pressured these big oil companies to get on board. And you listen to conservatives and the Democrats all talk about who's responsible for the oil prices and the gas prices going up. They all want to point the finger at each other. But who is quiet during this period of time are the big oil executives. They're not saying a word. They have nothing to say. But if you do a little bit of research on the big oil executives, from ConocoPhillips to Exxon to BP, they've all signed on to ESG. They've all signed on to this. They're all talking about moving in a different direction to where they're incorporating different types of energy. Well, James Corbett released two documentaries, How Big Oil Conquered the World and Why Big Oil Conquered the World, and in which he shows that big oil back in the 70s signed on to the green agenda, and that they've been manipulating the green agenda ever since, because they look at it as a way to make money and to further monopolize energy. And so I'm suggesting that the whole green movement from the big oil perspective is a land grab, because you can't have solar panels, you can't have wind farms if you don't have the land for it. Back in the day, when it was just oil drilling, they just rented the land from the person who owned the mineral rights of the property. But in order to run a solar farm, and in order to run a wind farm, they have to get the land. And part of the agenda, as you see with BlackRock buying up massive amounts of residential areas, with Bill Gates buying up massive amounts of farmland, is these ultra rich people are trying to gather as many resources as possible so that they can curb against the inflation that we're feeling now. And so we had a long, in-depth conversation about how big oil is actually operating and cooperating with these massive financial institutions in order to implement a social credit score and move energy away from fossil fuels. And in the long run, it's going to hurt the average person and not the big oil executives.
Huh. And I thought the color-coded revolutions had bad motives behind them. Jesus, that is pretty heavy. My next issue is the lockdowns in China. How many times did we hear, for heaven's sake, if you stupid Americans would just be like the Chinese, we could have gotten this whole thing over in 2 weeks, could have gotten a vaccination in 2 weeks and 1 day, and then we would have had this thing long behind us. Well, that, like everything else that comes out of the NPC statist mouth, was a complete lie. What I did hear, I was so shy to really put this into article form, because it's so hard to verify. Even the videos you see on Twitter, you go, am I really seeing what I think I'm seeing? Do I know that this is from a recent date? So that was difficult. What I did was I tried to find a collection of sources verifying that, first of all, the lockdowns existed because this was some time ago. But remember that these Shanghai lockdowns, you have millions of people under cannot leave your house lockdowns, where the state just monopolizes all food production and food distribution. Again, China has one of the highest vaccination rates on the planet at around 86.1%. If you click on this link here, it'll take you to a list of the most to least vaccinated countries. So here is just a quick intro from Reason. In Shanghai, 25 million people remain on lockdown as 26,087 new COVID cases were reported on Sunday. The situation has grown increasingly dire. 2 people tried to leave their apartment to walk their dog, were confronted by a COVID prevention worker who they ended up attacking. At least one man allegedly tried to get the cops to apprehend him so he could at least have food to eat. Meanwhile, people who end up in central quarantine, state-administered facilities where COVID positive people are sometimes sent so others in their apartment buildings don't get sick, complain about the fact that it's so unhygienic. It may well be facilitating greater spread of the virus or even reinfection. Shared rooms, no running water, broken toilets, or disgusting ones shared by hundreds of people, and people crammed into overflow beds in hospital hallways have grown to be expected by the city's increasingly angry residents. And then you have a collection of pictures brought to us by The Atlantic, credit where credit's due. That's a really informative link. But yeah, I mean, look, this is where this tyranny can bring us. It's so dangerous and it's so bad that, it's tempting to just say, well, if we would have embraced tyranny for a short amount of time, well, once you give them all this power, you have very little, if any, recourse after the fact. So I thought that was important because, gosh, was I the only one that heard that if only we locked down like the Chinese, everything would have been fine and we could go back to normal? Tell me you guys remember that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Patrick McFarland. Next, we have the Elijah Schaeffer shot at libertarians and beautiful ratio. Fill us in on this.
Yeah, I only recently became aware of Elijah Schaeffer, and I have to admit I don't really know too much about him. However, I think that his tweet is important because it really encapsulates what we've been hearing a lot in what I've been thinking of as the libertarian identity crisis post-COVID. Is this kind of this culture war within libertarianism about pragmatism and embracing populist Republicans and having more of a pragmatic approach to things, and libertarian purity testing, the Lolberts, people who think that, we should perhaps, their answer to the public schooling question is that, well, public schools shouldn't exist. And of course, that doesn't necessarily really help us in the meantime. So I had Kim Robinson on, who's a writer at the Libertarian Institute, to talk about kind of this split. And because I wanted to get the other side of the situation, because I'm a little concerned that, we might be caught up in some kind of a moral panic situation. And that doesn't mean that concerns are unfounded about things happening in public schools, which is just an example that exemplifies, this kind of culture split. So I wanted to have Kim Robinson on to present the other side. Elijah Schaeffer says libertarians and anarchists will never actually take power because they are uncomfortable with the idea of that or what it would take. They sit idly back as their country burns and tell themselves abstractly that it would be better if the state didn't exist. And Elijah Schaeffer calls that rationalized cowardice. And I think the true answer kind of lies in the middle. I am someone who I think that a little pragmatism is necessary. I would rather not have teachers teaching sexual education to kids in elementary school. But at the same time, I think that we need to remember that the thing that sets us apart is that we're radicals. We are radicals, and that's what the libertarian tradition is. And I suppose it's fair enough if you want to eschew the libertarian banner and continue on your own path. That's one thing. But for those of us under the term libertarian, we need to remember that we're radicals. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be pragmatic, but ultimately ending public schools is a goal. It's something that I think that should be stated and pursued.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with having both a long-term and a short-term goal, as any person or group or company or organization should. So yeah, we need to have our eye on that North Star of total voluntarism in the education realm, as in any other capitalist act between consenting adults. But we need to embrace the small wins, certainly. I mean, certainly, I know Kinsella disagrees with this, but I think a voucher system would be a heck of a lot better. And certainly pushing the Don't Say Gay bill to K through 12. The state shouldn't be talking about anything in particular. And that's just in principle. They shouldn't be using stolen money to talk about sex with kids. But then you see some of the videos that Libs of TikTok pushes out. I don't know how seldom these exist and whether these are one-offs, but heavens, there is a lot of terrible material. So just let us opt out. But he's not appreciating the principled objection we have to this whole arrangement. So whereas the conservative will always be stuck in this cost-benefit analysis, why shouldn't public schools get more funding? Well, we'll have to do a bunch of studies, and then the state buys off all the people who are doing the studies, and then the media spins the studies, no matter if they come out in favor of or against. And if things are doing bad, well, we need to drastically increase funding then, so we can get them back. What is the non-libertarian objection to that besides Mitt Romney's? Well, it should be local because there might be more accountability there. Total nonsense. So very unappreciative for a guy who I like so much. Elijah Schaeffer is usually very good. I bet that this was just a drunken rant, which he'll later clarify. Tommy, any thoughts on the pragmatism and principle?
Yeah, I think the problem that libertarians fall into is they are trying to make liberals happy, and when you look at, I'm reading a lot about a lot by early liberals, and what I'm finding is that I constantly disagree with them because they take this scientism and this scientific approach to every aspect of life. And all right, so I'm reading like Charles Galton Darwin right now. And one of the things he talks about is without the state, there would be barbarism. And what it is that the people that grow up as bullies and the bullies that you encounter in school are so selfish and willing to do whatever it takes to reach their goals that they would become these barbarians, right? But he has this kind of like psychological scientific approach to the subject, and therefore the only solution is to have strict governance against this. And I'm like, no, that what people need to be taught is to resist this at a young age and how to resist bullying, right? And this will be unpopular, and I'm going to say it on the Libertarian Institute, but maybe the war against bullying caused more problems than it solved, because then you're taking away a child's ability to defy the odds, to go against all these obstructions that show up in life. There's no bigger bully than life itself, and it doesn't care if it's fair or not.
Yeah, bully, again, is one of the very imprecise terms that can be used for certainly good things. I mean, any sort of social feedback, any sort of competing mechanism where people try to solve disputes or do things on their own kind of builds not only thicker skin, but builds you intellectually. So you say, look, I have a problem. How am I going to deal with this, considering I'm the only one who controls my body? When now it's like immediately, quick, what do we do? Delegate it to the experts. What does the state have to say? When really it's like, as they're telling us what Russia's doing is inherently evil, they tell us we need a state and they need to monopolize guns and all this other nonsense. I mean, what if there was like a little bullying pushback on that? Because I feel like these are the bullies of today who we just can't stand up to. It's like so easy to stand up to the little kid who's picking on another kid, but the big bullies, the Fauci, the CCP, the regime in Kiev, who's been killing people for 8 years. It's so much more difficult. Yeah, Taylor, really. that is like the perfect case of someone who you could just consider just weak and ridiculous, who given a little bit of institutional power and a nice little push from the Post. I have seen 3 times that article has been promoted on my feed. I'm sorry to say I ended up reading it because I wanted to do a analysis of it, but it was so weak that there's no material. Did you guys read that?
No, I didn't read it. I've heard Tim Pool talk about it.
Stay strong. Don't do it.
Can I make a comment about this Elijah Schaeffer thing though?
Yeah.
In that thread, he said that conservatives were the only ones that are being depersoned and deplatformed because they're the only threat to the institutions. So my question for him is, are you not conservative enough because you're still on social media?
God damn it. Why didn't I think of that?
Because you're not me.
I know. I got to be you more often. This is terrible. So what came to mind was I said Ryan Dawson, Reed Coverdale, both of them now have new accounts. Mance Raider, who was Pete's old account, former gentleman who used to work with us. Stefan Molyneux. Alex Jones has called himself libertarian a ton of times. I forgot Roger Stone, who was deleted off Twitter, was would call himself a libertarian. Milo called himself an ANCAP on Facebook, got invited to speak at Anarcho-Poco, so he's very friendly in our camp, as was Gavin McGinnis. Molyneux's probably been the biggest one of all, but then I forgot Daniel McAdams also got banned as well. So first of all, it's not true, and second of all, that's kind of a jerky thing to just take a shot at us for no reason, especially when we're here bringing the principled opposition that it's not just this cost-benefit analysis calculator that they have. It's like saying, you know what, Islam is the only real threat to the establishment because that's who they've been bombing for 20 years. And Elijah Schaeffer's they don't even bomb that guy. What a fucking coward. What is he, Bill Gates' son or something? Not exactly in-depth analysis.
I got nuked too, but I deserved it. So
yeah, sometimes it's deserved. But
I knew when I said it, I was like, "That's it."
I remember telling a guy to eat Tide Pods, and I go, "They're not going to do it." Next thing, I saw a 12-hour ban. God damn it! Like, that wasn't worth it. That wasn't worth it. But the Mance Raider first account. I mean, that was just so ridiculous. He basically said he was going to defend himself against any aggressor, some piece of trash, and then he got canned. Who else? Who else is here? Molyneux. Oh, Molyneux was amazing because they didn't even give him a specific thing. It's like on YouTube when they just scan and take a video down and say it violates our terms without ever being specific. It's like so psychotic. Okay, what do we have here? Okay, I wrote this article and I titled it "Neoconservatives Are the Flat Earthers of Foreign Policy." The image I chose was Ayan Hirsi. I wish I can get some traction out of this thing. So Douglas Murray, even though he has written what is probably one of the most important books in the last few years, The War on the West, he originally wrote a book, Neoconservatism, Why We Need It, in 2006. And it's not good at all. Ben Shapiro, while not a neocon in the sense of he would have been a never Trumper and he would have voted Biden, all of these foreign policy disagreements completely align with Ben Shapiro's worldview. And then finally, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, I'm sad to say, I quote directly in this, and it's really bad. So check out, I walk through why Murray is wrong about what neoconservatism is, and then why Ayaan Hirsi Ali is explicitly wrong in her war on terror narrative. So all that I really have here is I just ask a few questions because I generally like to get the neocon response to them just to see how these people respond to ideas like this. So first, I ask, I just have 6 questions here. I said, when, if ever, would another country be morally justified in bombing British or American cities and forming blockades around our countries to starve us? Because with everything else, we're stuck into, wait, hold on, did Gaddafi really kill those people? Well, was he really a threat to those other people in Libya? What would have been the cost-benefit analysis of not killing him, but arresting him and trying in a court? We get bogged down in all this nonsense. It's like, could they do it to us, for heaven's sake? Second question. Has the war on terrorism decreased the number of al-Qaeda members or international terrorists since 2001? That answer's no. I linked to Scott Horton's book enough already. Have countries like Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Somalia, Pakistan, and Yemen been stabilized or democratized? As a result of these interventions, are America and her allies stronger nations with more international respect? If the National Socialist violation of Polish independence was a crime worthy of waging war in 1939, why was Poland given to Stalin in 1945? Did Britain's 1914 declaration of war on Germany stabilize Europe? So, in other words, my point is that the biggest wars in the last century were either based on lies, the costs outweighed the benefits, or simply didn't achieve the desired ends that they keep telling us we're just one intervention away from achieving X, Y, or Z. And my general thesis is these politicians have no incentive to do so. They have no incentive to provide a good product or service. It attracts the worst people on earth who have no problem killing for money. And they almost have to lie. I don't want to say have to, they choose to. Because in order to get someone to hate a certain group or regime, you can lie to them and they might hate them. But how do you get someone to risk getting their head and limbs blown off, never seeing their family again? Well, you have to say, like, all right, these guys, you have to do babies on bayonets, babies in incubators. You have to fabricate all these things. Saddam is just days away. His guys met with Muhammad Atta in Prague. So basically, we're going after the 9/11 guys. This is what you guys can sign on to fight against. Saddam, who did 9/11, more or less. This is the lying concept that they get you in. Because how else are they going to get you to risk getting your life taken away? So that is my neocon response there.
So just to comment on that, I was a personal injury attorney for about 2 years, and long enough to learn about this very successful method that high caliber personal injury plaintiffs attorneys use. So these are people who represent injured people in car accidents and, other acts of negligence against powerful insurance companies. And this method is called the reptile method. And the whole thesis of the reptile method is that you need to engage the jury's reptile brain. And so everything that you just said, Keith, are those reptile arguments. They are, they're using fear in these very base, very fundamental evolutionary psychology triggers in the human mind to get people to do this. Oh, say that, you need to act in defense of your friends and family. You need to act for, to prevent all of this horrible disaster and all these different things. Well, that is the reptile brain.
Unbelievable stuff here. Yeah, you know what? This Donbass war documentary, I just got to show the beginning of this. I mean, if you look, I'm not going to do the audio, but in the first minute or so, you will get more pissed off about this topic than you have in the years watching it. It's in Russian. Gosh, how do I scroll down on this thing? But yeah, this is what the Kiev government was doing to people on the eastern part of Ukraine, who they first designated as terrorists. And this is what makes it real. So, yes, we know intellectually that government violates the NAP. I'm very unhappy about that. But then you see the suffering and you go, God, it's so real, this thing that we're up against, you're murdering civilians. And the immediate conclusion, 23 people killed, 30 injured, women and children, they said, well, this missile attack makes no sense in terms of military strategy, but there was only one real goal, to intimidate. And this is just so vicious. And to know that we're up against these people, it's like there's so many legitimate crimes, to know that there's still crimes that they still have to fabricate. It's all about controlling the narrative. Absolutely terrible stuff. Tommy, final article here. America's response to the war in Ukraine with Dave DeCamp. Walk us through this.
It goes back to the Kyle Lanzalone article that we were actually talking about earlier, because we talk about that Washington Post piece, and we talk about Hillary Clinton, basically comparing the war in Ukraine to luring the Russians into Afghanistan. And there may be, a few, things that happen in that we don't like, but, for the most part, it's worth it, And then we get into the sanctions and how they're hurting the U.S. citizens just as much as they're hurting the Russian citizens. And that's been admitted by Biden, saying that the sanctions aren't just on Russia, that they are on U.S. citizens, which I thought was interesting, because he released that statement the day after I released an episode in which I said, it really feels like the sanctions are on us. It's almost as like he's listening to my podcast, which I was like, oh, thank you, Joe Biden, for tuning in. But yeah, and so we get into how America's responded and how it's affecting all of us. And it's not just targeted at Putin and the military of Russia, but it's targeted at us. And then we end it with, are they going to push us into nuclear war? And is this their goal? So
are you guys going to Freedom Fest?
I'm not. No. I have very limited vacation, so have plans to go to Childeberg, because I promised my wife we would not ever miss a Childeberg. So I got to bring her to Childeberg.
I'll be seeing Tommy at Childeberg, but I will also be going to Freedom Fest. Yeah.
If you guys want $50 off tickets, you can use the code Horton50, HORTON, at checkout for $50 off your ticket. I think Freedom Fest is going to be a blast. A lot of us are going there. We're going to be conducting interviews with some of the speakers, so that should be a good time. Thanks to everyone for watching the Libertarian Institute Odyssey and YouTube channel. Patrick and Tommy, thank you for your time, gentlemen.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.